Jesus as our high priest, our royal priest. Hebrews 5:1. For every high priest chosen among men is appointed to act on behalf of men in relation to God, to offer gifts and sacrifices for sins. Number 1. You need a priest and a covenant to have a permanent relationship with God. Number 2. You need a high priest to have access to God, with mediation and sacrifice, a representative of Israel, speaking and pleading on their and his behalf, being an intercessor, and reconciling the people and himself back to God. Number 3. This person is called into the position of high priest by God. Number 4. And there is only one of them at any time. These are the Old Testament requirements set forth by God to govern and convene with his people. As so they thought. But it turns out that all of this had a deeper meaning that they would never really know until Jesus shows up on the scene. Well, or even after that. Through time, all those high priests were just walking in the shadow that Jesus made in the future. Their duties reflect all that Jesus did for us. Let's go back over the duties and requirements of these high priests and think of Jesus. For the time's sake, all parallels and meanings can't be covered or we'd be here all day, so here's just a few. The high priest was the highest ranking priest in the tabernacle or temple and was the head of the religious community, the boss, as you might say. He had to follow more restrictive laws than other priests. His heritage, after all, was traced back to Aaron, the brother of Moses, an important dude, so there's more at stake with his reputation through his family line. He was also charged with maintaining the sanctity of the temple and making sure all the other priests were doing their jobs correctly, like keeping the menorah lit and trimmed, and the other basic duties like forgiving sins, interceding for the people's needs, restoring the people from being impure so they could enter the temple to worship. As I read that, did you hear the parallels of Jesus and the high priests? Jesus was called by God to be placed here on earth to be our royal high priest, to be the perfect sacrifice to deal with the sins separating us from God. He was baptized, anointed with oil and blood, and he forgave sins and restored people. He was the spiritual leader of his group, leading the way and managing his underlings. He lived by the law and even more restrictions to be sinless. His lineage went back to King David, just like the prophets said. He was an intercessor for the people day and night, and he took seriously the sanctity of the temple. He called out priests and leaders for being evil and challenged the system and flipped over tables. He was the head honcho around them parts, and he was going to put things back in the order he knew was right. He quoted and claimed Psalms 110 to the Sanhedrin, claiming to be the high priest. You are a priest forever according to the order of Melchizedek. And to the current high priest Caiaphas they took him. To him Jesus claimed Daniel 7:13 through 14 that he was the Son of Man, as he was asked. And Jesus soon became that perfect sacrifice, after which caused the veil that separated man from God, this fabric 60 feet high, 30 feet wide, and 4 inches thick, to be torn in half, so anyone can go talk to God. In the early years before the temple, the tabernacle was built. We know it was a heavenly representation, specifically made with a purpose and meaning for each material and color used. The tabernacle was built so it looked dull on the outside, but miraculous on the inside. But the inside could only be seen by a few people for very specific reasons. There was a specific area, the third section, called the Holy of Holies, where God's presence dwelt and held the Ark of the Covenant. Remember that inside the Ark was the 10 Commandment tablets brought down by Moses on Mount Sinai, his wooden staff that budded, the one that ate Pharaoh's snake, and a pot that carried manna. Only the high priest could go into the Holy of Holies, and only once a year for the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur. Others who tried died. We'll come back to this. It is easy to take the fast road here because it is so exciting, but let's step back a bit to a very important ceremony and feast day called Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. After releasing the enslaved people from Egypt, God wanted all of his people to be able to talk with him. But the golden calf and their sins ruined that, so after Moses' time, the high priest gets to be the only one to talk to God, the intercessor on their behalf. With all this sin happening, atonement for them needed to be made, and this is where Yom Kippur comes in. But first, you need a high priest. Appointing the high priest and other priests had a special ritual. Things were gathered, and so were the people, to watch this event. I'll summarize the high priest's ritual. First, he was washed in water in bronze laver. It's like a picture of baptism. And then they dressed him in plain robes of a priest and added the unique special garments of the high priest's job. The high priest, not the other priests, get anointed with oil, olive oil and spices poured over his head. Then ram's blood on the right ear, right thumb, and right big toe are applied. The rest of his body is already covered with clothing. Then a little oil is applied in the same manner. Just as Jesus had the oil, then the blood. Everyone else had to give blood first before they could have the oil. Just like the disciples get the Holy Spirit after Jesus dies on the cross. Jewish rituals never applied blood to people unless it was anointing a priest or the high priest. Leviticus 8:34 and 35. As has been done today, the Lord has commanded to be done to make atonement for you. At the entrance of the tent of meeting you shall remain day and night for 7 days, performing what the Lord has charged, so that you do not die, for so I have been commanded. Generally, this is what happened before you could perform your priestly duties. Let's go a little deeper into these special garments and see the parallels with not only the high priest himself, but with what he wears. Exodus 28:2 and 3. And you shall make holy garments for Aaron your brother, for glory and for beauty. You shall speak to all the skillful, whom I have filled with a spirit of skill, that they make Aaron's garments to consecrate him for my priesthood. These special garments were unique to his position, additional colorful pieces that contrasted the plain white robes worn by the other priests. There was a basic white linen outfit that all the priests shared, starting with shorts, like board shorts to cover their nether regions. Looks like all the important people wear underwear, so feel special because it seems you're important too. They also wore a long-sleeved ankle-length tunic and a sash and a long strip of cloth that wrapped around the head like a turban. The additional 4 garments were specifically for the high priest. He wore the same colors as the inside of the tabernacle, which normal people cannot see. It's like he's bringing God out into the people to be tabernacling among us. The usual priest's white linen thread was woven with the carefully dyed sheep's wool, blues and purples and scarlets, along with gold thread to create elaborately embroidered pieces. First, he wore a blue robe, seamless and sleeveless, and it was slightly shorter than the white one underneath, to show along the bottom alternating gold bells and pomegranate-shaped tassels of colorful wool. Blue representing all things heavenly and having authority of heavenly origin. And the bells ringing sounded so that the people would know they were in the presence of a representative of the Lord, and so that he would not die coming and going from the holy place. Showing pomegranates also represents fruitfulness, prosperity, so many seeds in one fruit, juice that looks like blood, and the membranes that hold the seeds of the juice looks like snakeskin. All of these things have deeper meanings to look into. Next, the ephod, a vest or apron with 2 onyx engraved gemstones on the shoulders. The names of the 12 tribes of Israel were engraved and painted gold on them. These represent the high priest carrying the people of Israel on his shoulders, and that everything that he does should be for their good. Next, the breastplate of judgment. 12 different precious, valuable stones were set in gold and attached to the colorfully woven fabric. Each represented, again, the 12 tribes of Israel, as though the high priest not only carried them on his shoulders, but kept them close to his heart and brought them before God every day like the intercessor he is being. It was folded in half to make a pocket of fabric, which holds the Urim and the Thummim. Exodus 28:30. And in the breastplate of judgment you shall put the Urim and the Thummim, and they shall be on Aaron's heart when he goes in before the Lord. Thus Aaron shall bear the judgment of the people of Israel on his heart before the Lord regularly. And to all the priests it symbolized God's guidance and truth. The high priest would get revelations from God with them, like direction and decisions on what to do. Hebrews 1:1-2. Long ago, at many times and in many ways, God spoke to our fathers by the prophets, but in these last days he has spoken to us by his Son, whom he appointed the heir of all things, through whom also he created the world. Twisted gold chains attached this to the shoulder stones, and blue ribbons tied it into place. And lastly, an engraved gold crown plate saying "Holiness to the Lord" over the front of the turban tied around the head with blue ribbons. His thoughts represented holiness always. Exodus 28:38. It shall be on Aaron's forehead, and Aaron shall bear any guilt from the holy things that the people of Israel consecrate as their holy gifts. It shall regularly be on his forehead, that they may be accepted before the Lord. Even we need the high priest to represent our gifts to God to be worthy. So many representations of Jesus and his purpose in one place. The high priest has to wear the garments all the time, except on one special day, or he bears the guilt and sin and dies. What the clothes represent can bear the sin for them so that they won't have to die. What is between you and God? The clothes. Aaron cannot bear guilt because he isn't holy. It's like God saying, "You are representing Jesus. Don't mess up that representation or I'll kill you." Every day of the year, the priest would do his duties and follow the customs of the office except this one day. And on this day, the same day that Moses came down from Mount Sinai with the second set of tablets, the people's second chance, the sacrifices will be made, and the high priest is able to go into the Holy of Holies for the first and only time this year. He needs to do a few things first. He has to bathe and get dressed, but this time he doesn't wear the 4 unique special pieces of colorful clothes. He only wears what all the other priests are wearing and looks just like them. Jesus puts aside his heavenly robes of splendor to look just like us and yet remains holy. Leviticus 1:3b-4. If his offering is a burnt offering from the herd, he shall offer the male without blemish. He shall bring it to the entrance of the tent of meeting, that he may be accepted before the Lord. He shall lay his hand on the head of the burnt offering, and it shall be accepted for him to make atonement for him. On this Yom Kippur, he would present the animals for sacrifice at the entrance to the tent of meeting before the Lord. His own bull, an animal of the herd for a sin offering, and from the Israelite community, a ram for the burnt offering, an animal totally consumed by fire, from the herd or the flocks, birds only if you were poor, and 2 goats for a sin offering. Sin offerings are very detailed activities. He offers it, laying of hands as transfer of sins, kills it, sprinkles blood, dabs blood, pours blood, all in the right place for a specific meaning. Then he takes out the kidneys and the fat and the liver, burns it, gathers the ashes, flesh, head, legs, organs, intestines, like the rest of the bull, is taken outside the camp to the right place, and the ashes from the fat are at the bottom, and then the rest of the bull is stacked on top of wood, and all that is burned. That is a sin offering. Now, the burnt offering involves presenting the animal, laying of hands as transfer of sins, killing it, splattering its blood, skinning the animal, cutting it into pieces, and the legs and the organs are washed, and then all of the animal is placed on a wooden fire and burned completely. Then the high priest casts lots, which is dice, for which goat will be the scapegoat for Azazel, who is a demon of the wilderness, and which goat is the one that's sacrificed to God. Right there at the entrance of the tent of meeting, the high priest lays his hand on the bull's head and slaughters the bull as a sacrifice for himself and his house first. They laid hands on him right after the Judas kiss, a transfer of sins from the Jew and Gentile to the sacrifice. Matthew 26:48 through 50. Now the betrayer had given them a sign, saying, "The one I will kiss is the man. Seize him." And he came up to Jesus at once and said, "Greetings, Rabbi," and kissed him. Jesus said to him, "Friend, do what you came to do." Then they came up and laid hands on Jesus and seized him. The high priest is then to take a censer full of burning coals from the altar and 2 handfuls of incense, and take them behind the curtain, the Holy of Holies where God dwells. He is to put the incense on the fire, and the smoke of the incense will conceal the mercy seat, the seat of the Ark of the Covenant, so that he will not die. Ephesians 5:2. And walk in love as Christ loved us and give himself up for us, a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God. He is to take some of the bull's blood and with his finger sprinkle it on the mercy seat. Then he shall sprinkle some of it 7 times in front of the mercy seat. Then the high priest will go out and slaughter the goat in the same way and bring it in and sprinkle it in the same way. This blood sprinkled is God accepting the sacrifice and giving grace, forgiveness to the people. Matthew 18:21-22. Then Peter came up and said to him, "Lord, how often will my brother sin against me, and I forgive him? As many as 7 times?" And Jesus said to him, "I do not say to you 7 times, but 77 times. Isaiah 52:13-15. Behold, my servant shall act wisely. He shall be high and lifted up, and shall be exalted. as many were astonished at you. His appearance was so marred beyond human semblance, and his form beyond that of the children of mankind. So shall he sprinkle many nations. Kings shall shut their mouths because of him, for that which has not been told them they see, and that which they have not heard they understand. The high priest then kills the animal for himself, his family, and the people. Who killed Jesus? The Jew and the Gentile. Those hands killed the sacrifice which would atone for all their sins. And all of this is a reflection that they would never be good enough because of sin to be the perfect sacrifice. Hebrews 7:24 through 27. But he, because he continues forever, has an unchangeable priesthood. Therefore he is also able to save the utmost those who come to God through him, since he always lives to make intercession for them. For such a high priest was fitting for us, who is holy, harmless, undefiled, separate from sinners, and has become higher than the heavens, who does not need daily, as those high priests, to offer up sacrifices, first for his own sins and then for the people's. For this he did once for all when he offered up himself. During this ritual, no one goes in with the high priest. Only he can make atonement for himself, his family, and all the people of Israel. Matthew 20:22 through 23. Jesus answered, You do not know what you are asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I am to drink? They said to him, We are able. And he said to them, You will drink my cup, but to sit at my right hand and at my left is not mine to grant, but it is for those for whom it has been prepared by my Father. Back to the ritual. Then the high priest comes out and sprinkles the blood to the horns of the altar 7 times. The rest of the blood gets poured out at the altar's base. The alive goat is brought to the high priest. He lays his hands on it and symbolically transfers all the sins and impurities of the people, and has another man take it away into the wilderness. Now the people are purified through Yom Kippur. The reset button has been hit, and now it starts off all clean until next year when they have to do it again. Then the high priest goes into the holy place, disrobes, bathes, re-robes, and comes out to continue with the burnt offering of the ram. Meanwhile, the man who took the goat to the wilderness is coming back at some point, and he has to wash, or in some references, burn his clothes, and wash himself before he can enter the tabernacle again. Meanwhile, the other priests take the body of the bull and the goat outside the camp to be burned. They too must wash up before coming back in. This isn't all just on the high priests and priests' shoulders to deal with. The people had a job too. Leviticus 16's end says that the people are to afflict yourselves and shall do no work, which traditionally states that the people fasted, didn't bathe, didn't have sex, didn't wear perfume or lotion, and wear no leather shoes. When Jesus, our high priest, died on the cross, the veil of separation tears in half. His sacrifice was sufficient atonement for sins, so the Holy of Holies, God's place of dwelling, is accessible to all. Hebrews 10:19 and 20. Therefore, brothers, since we have confidence to enter the holy places by Jesus' blood, by the new and living way that he opened for us through the curtain, that is, through his flesh. All these parables are undeniable, and the book of Hebrews states 15 times that Jesus is the high priest, which we've read a few already. 1 John 2, 1 through 2. My little children, these things I write to you, so that you may not sin. And if anyone sins, we have the advocate with the Father, Jesus Christ the righteous. And he himself is the propitiation for our sins, and not for ours only, but also for the whole world. Hebrews 7, 11 and 12. Therefore, if perfection were through the Levitical priesthood, for under it the people received the law, what further need was there that another priest should rise according to the order of Melchizedek, and not be called according to the order of Aaron? For the priesthood being changed, of necessity there is also a change of the law. Jesus himself ends up saying it all. John 5:46. For if you believed Moses, you would believe me, for he wrote of me. The Talmud states that Yom Kippur and Tu B'Av were the most joyous days of the year, matchmaking days. After the scapegoat was cast away and the sins of Israel were forgiven, all eligible women would wear white gowns and dance in the vineyards, chanting, Young men, lift up your eyes and see what you choose for yourself. Do not set your eyes on beauty, but set your eyes on a good family. Grace is deceptive, beauty is illusory. It is for her fear of the Lord that a woman is to be praised. Extol her for the fruit of her hand, and let her works be praising herself at the gates. Think of the connections here. Jesus coming back for his spotless bride. Remember, white meant sinless and pure. Think of the 10 virgins story. Here's another cool tidbit to think on. The day before Yom Kippur, everyone is supposed to have a great feast. Could this be the connection of the Last Supper with communion? So many events repeating themselves through Jesus, our high priest.